Clint Eastwood parked his car in the small lot behind the Malpaso Grill. The weather in Carmel by the sea was perfect today, sunny with a cool breeze coming off the Pacific Ocean. He sat for a moment, looking at the back entrance of his restaurant. Clint was now 91 years old, but his eyes were still sharp and missed very little. It had been 3 months since he had visited his restaurant. He had been busy filming his newest movie in Arizona. The hot desert sun had been hard on him, but he never complained. Clint was not a man who complained. He was a man who fixed problems, and that was why he was here today. Unannounced. The phone call from his old friend Sam had bothered him. Sam lived in Carmel and ate at the Malpaso Grill twice a week. "The food isn't the same, Clint," Sam had said yesterday. "Something's changed. Not sure what, but it's not right." Clint didn't like hearing that. The restaurant was important to him. He had opened it 10 years ago, after his time as mayor of Carmel had ended. It was a connection to the town he loved, a place where regular people could enjoy good food without the Hollywood fuss. He got out of his car slowly. His knees weren't what they used to be, but he still stood tall. He wore a simple outfit, blue jeans, a light brown jacket, and a baseball cap pulled low. He didn't want to be recognized right away. He wanted to see how things really were. Clint had a key to the back door. He used it now, entering quietly through the storage area. The smell of food cooking hit him right away. It smelled good, fresh. Bread, grilling meat, and herbs. That was a good sign. He moved through the back hallway, past the walk-in freezer and dry storage. He could hear the kitchen staff working, pots clanging, people calling orders, the sizzle of food on the grill. It sounded busy for a Tuesday afternoon. Clint had hired Joe Palmer 5 years ago to manage the restaurant. Joe was a good man, honest and hardworking. He had run restaurants in San Francisco before moving to Carmel for a quieter life. Clint trusted Joe, which was why Sam's call had surprised him so much. As he neared the kitchen, Clint heard voices coming from the small office to his right. He recognized Joe's voice immediately. The door was partly open. "We can't keep doing this," Joe was saying. His voice sounded stressed. "It's not right. What choice do we have?" The second voice belonged to Susan Miller, the head chef. Clint had hired her himself 3 years ago after eating at her previous restaurant in Monterey. "If we tell him, you know what will happen." Clint stopped walking. They were clearly talking about him. He stood very still, just out of sight of the office door. "He's going to find out eventually," Joe said. "You can't hide something like this forever." Hide what from me? Clint wondered. His mind ran through possibilities. Were they stealing money? Cutting corners on food quality? Using his name to make side deals? "The delivery is coming tomorrow," Susan said. "We need to decide now." "Fine." Joe sighed one more time. "But after that, we need to tell Clint the truth. I won't keep lying to him." Clint felt a tightness in his chest. Joe Palmer, the man he trusted to run his restaurant, was hiding something from him. Something that required lying. He was about to step into the office when he heard a third voice. It was Bill Davis, the restaurant's accountant. "I've gone through all the numbers again," Bill said. His voice was quiet, always careful. "It's worse than we thought. We're losing money every week." "How bad?" Joe asked. "Bad enough that we might need to close by Christmas if things don't change," Bill replied. Clint's hand froze on the door. Close. His restaurant? That couldn't be right. The place was always busy. He had checked the accounts himself before leaving for Arizona. Everything had been fine then. "It's those new suppliers Clint signed contracts with before he left," Susan said. "The ones his friend Greg recommended. The quality is good, but the prices are killing us." "And the new chef stations he had built," Joe added. "The custom work cost twice what we budgeted." Clint remembered those decisions. Greg had introduced him to some high-end food suppliers from San Francisco. The ingredients were excellent. Organic vegetables, prime meats, artisan cheeses. And the new cooking stations had been his idea too. He wanted Susan to have the best equipment possible. "So what are we going to do?" Susan asked. "We can't tell Clint his friend's suppliers are too expensive. And we can't tell him the kitchen remodel is hurting us." He was so proud of doing that. For the staff, Clint felt his stomach sink. They weren't stealing or cheating. They were trying to protect him from his own mistakes. "That's exactly why we have to tell him," Joe insisted. "This place matters to him. If it closes because we're too afraid to be honest, that's on us." "You don't understand," Susan said. Her voice was getting emotional. "When he hired me, he told me this restaurant was his way of being part of normal life. Hollywood took so much from him. The Malpaso is his connection to regular people. If he finds out his Hollywood friends and Hollywood spending are what's killing it ... Her voice trailed off. Clint stood in the hallway, taking in every word. He had indeed said those things to Susan. The restaurant was his escape from the film world. A place where he could just be a business owner, not a movie star. "We need to cancel tomorrow's delivery and call the local suppliers," Bill suggested. "We can say we're trying a special farm-to-table month or something." "And the wine?" Joe asked. "Greg's Vineyard sends us cases every month, and half of it doesn't sell. Clint thinks it's our most popular option. I can adjust the inventory numbers." Bill said quietly. "It's not exactly honest, but no more lying," Joe cut him off. "That's how we got into this mess. We should have told him the first time we saw the numbers dropping." Clint had heard enough. He pushed the door open. 3 shocked faces turned toward him. Papers were spread across the desk, spreadsheets, invoices, bank statements. A half-eaten lunch sat forgotten on the corner. "Mr. Eastwood." Susan gasped. Her face turned pale. "How ... How long have you been standing there?" Joe asked. He looked like he had seen a ghost. Clint stepped fully into the small office. His face showed no emotion, the same steady gaze that had made him famous in westerns decades ago. "Long enough," he said, his voice low and gravelly. Bill nervously gathered papers together. Joe stood up straight, like a man preparing to be fired. Susan looked close to tears. Clint closed the door behind him. He took off his cap and placed it on the desk, right on top of a spreadsheet marked monthly losses. "Seems like we need to talk," he said. The silence in the room was complete. Outside, they could hear the restaurant running, servers taking orders, customers chatting, dishes being cleared. Normal sounds from a restaurant that, unknown to everyone eating there, was slowly dying. "I'm sorry, Mr. Eastwood," Joe finally said. "We should have told you sooner." Clint pulled up the spare chair and sat down. His knees thanked him. "Show me everything," he said. "No more secrets." The 3 exchanged nervous glances, then Bill opened his laptop. "It started about 2 months after you left for filming," he began. "That's when the new supplier contracts kicked in." As Bill talked, Clint listened carefully, his face giving nothing away. But inside, his mind was already working on how to save the restaurant that meant so much more to him than anyone realized. The small office felt even smaller with Clint Eastwood sitting there. Bill Davis opened his laptop and turned it so Clint could see the screen. The numbers were all in red. "We've been losing about $5,000 each week," Bill explained. His voice was shaky. "It started slowly, but it's getting worse." Clint looked at the screen without saying anything. His face remained calm, but his eyes moved quickly over the numbers. "Show me why," he said finally. Bill clicked to another screen. This one showed a list of suppliers with prices next to them. "These are the suppliers your friend Greg recommended," Bill said. "They're all high quality, but their prices are about 40% higher than our old local suppliers." Susan stepped forward. "The food quality is amazing," she added. "But we had 2 Raise menu prices to cover the costs. When we did that, we lost some of our regular customers. Joe nodded. The tourists still come because of your name, but the locals who used to eat here twice a week now come maybe once a month. They say it's become too expensive. Clint thought about this. The Malpaso Grill was meant to be a place for everyone, not just wealthy tourists. That had been important to him from the beginning. What else? He asked. Joe pulled out a folder and opened it on the desk. Inside were pictures of the kitchen renovation, the new cooking stations Clint had ordered before leaving. These cost nearly twice what we budgeted, Joe explained. The custom work had problems. We had to tear out walls, upgrade the electrical system, add new ventilation. You approved the extra costs, Susan said quickly. Joe called you on set, remember? But we didn't tell you how much it was hurting us financially. Clint remembered the call. He had been in the middle of filming a difficult scene. Joe had explained. There were some additional costs for the kitchen. Clint had simply said to do whatever was needed to make it right. And the wine? Clint asked, remembering what he had overheard. The three exchanged nervous glances. Your friend Greg's vineyard. Bill said carefully. We get 15 cases every month. But we only sell about 5. The rest sits in our cellar. Why doesn't it sell? Clint asked. Susan looked uncomfortable. It's not what our customers prefer. It's very unique, very strong, and it's the most expensive wine on our menu. So, I've been pushing wine that doesn't sell, ingredients that cost too much, and spent too much on kitchen renovations, Clint summarized. His voice wasn't angry, just matter of fact. We should have told you sooner, Joe admitted. That's on me. I was trying to make it work without bothering you during filming. Clint stood up and walked to the small window. Outside, he could see the ocean in the distance. The same ocean he had looked at every day when he was mayor of Carmel. The town had given him so much. This restaurant was his way of giving something back. How long do we have? He asked without turning around. At the current rate, Bill checked his computer. Maybe 4 months before we have to close, unless something changes. Clint turned back to face them. Something will change, he said firmly. He sat down again and pulled a notepad toward him. I want honest answers, no more protecting my feelings. What needs to happen to save this place? The three looked at each other, surprised by his directness. Well, Susan began, we need to renegotiate with the suppliers. Go back to using local products when possible. We need to simplify the menu, Joe added. Fewer items, but done really well. It would reduce waste and lower inventory costs. And the wine? Clint asked. We should reduce Greg's wine order, Bill said carefully. Maybe feature it as a special occasion wine instead of a regular offering. Clint wrote everything down. Then he looked up at them. What about the staff? Do we need to let people go? No, Joe said quickly. Our staff is already lean. Everyone works hard. Cutting staff would hurt service quality, and that's one thing. Customers love about us. Clint nodded. He had always believed in treating workers well. His father had worked many different jobs to support the family, and Clint never forgot those early lessons about the dignity of work. Okay, he said. Here's what we're going to do. He stood up and his presence seemed to fill the small office. Even at 91, Clint Eastwood commanded attention when he spoke. Joe, call Greg today. Tell him I want to talk about the wine and the suppliers. I'll handle that conversation. Joe nodded, looking relieved. Susan, I want a new menu by Friday. Simple, local, seasonal. Food that people can afford to eat regularly, not just on special occasions. Susan smiled for the first time since Clint had entered the office. I can do that. I've had ideas for months. Bill, I want you to look at our pricing structure. Find the sweet spot where locals can afford to eat here twice a week again. What about the debt we've already built up? Bill asked. Clint waved his hand. I'll cover that personally. But moving forward, this place needs to stand on its own. The three looked at each other with cautious hope. There's one more thing, Clint said. I'm calling a staff meeting for tomorrow morning before opening. Everyone needs to know where we stand and what's changing. Everything? Joe asked, surprised. You want to tell the whole staff about our financial problems? Everything, Clint. Confirmed, no more secrets. We're all in this together now. Just then, there was a knock at the office door. A young server named Lily poked her head in. Sorry to interrupt, but she stopped mid-sentence when she saw Clint. Her eyes went wide. Mr. Eastwood, we didn't know you were coming today. That was the idea, Clint said with a small smile. There's a situation in the dining room, Lily continued. Mrs. Henderson is upset about her fish. She says it's not as good as it used to be. She's asking for the manager. Joe stood up. I'll handle it. We'll both handle it, Clint said, rising from his chair. I'd like to say hello to Mrs. Henderson. As they left the office, Clint put his hand on Joe's shoulder. After that, I want to spend some time in the kitchen with Susan. Then I want to walk around and talk to the customers. I need to see everything for myself. Joe nodded. Of course. They walked through the kitchen, where the staff did double takes seeing Clint. Some looked nervous, others excited. Susan followed behind them. Don't worry about anything right now, Clint told her. Just do your jobs. We'll talk more tomorrow. As they entered the dining room, several customers noticed Clint right away. Whispers spread across the room. An older woman at a corner table waved excitedly. There's Mrs. Henderson, Joe said quietly. She's been coming here since we opened. Used to be 3 times a week. Now we only see her once a month or so. Clint nodded and walked toward her table. He put on his most charming smile, the one that had won over audiences for decades. Mrs. Henderson, he said warmly. I hear you have some thoughts about our fish today. The woman looked up at him in shock. Mr. Eastwood, I had no idea you were here today. Just dropped in to check on things, he said, pulling out a chair to sit at her table. Now, tell me what's wrong with the fish. And don't sugarcoat it. I want the truth. As Mrs. Henderson began explaining the difference between today's fish and how it used to taste, Clint listened carefully. This was just the beginning of his mission to save the Malpaso Grill, and as with everything in his long career, Clint Eastwood was determined to succeed. The next morning, Clint arrived at the Malpaso Grill at 8 a.m., 1 hour before the staff meeting. He wanted some quiet time to prepare what he would say. The restaurant looked different in the early morning light, peaceful and full of potential. He made himself a cup of coffee and sat at a table near the window. From his pocket, he took out the notes he had made last night at his home. After leaving the restaurant yesterday, he had stayed up late thinking about how to save the Malpaso Grill. At 8:30, Joe arrived carrying a box of fresh pastries from the bakery down the street. Good morning, Joe said, surprised to see Clint. Already there. I brought breakfast for the meeting. Good thinking, Clint said. People listen better when they're fed. Susan arrived next, carrying a thick folder. These are my ideas for the new menu, she explained, sitting down across from Clint. I've been working on them for months but was afraid to show you. Clint took the folder and opened it. Inside were recipes, cost breakdowns, and photos of dishes. They all looked delicious but simpler than the current menu. Local ingredients? Clint asked. Susan nodded. Everything from within 50 miles when possible. Seafood from Monterey Bay, vegetables from farms in the valley, bread from here in Carmel. What about Greg's suppliers? Clint asked. I've included some of their items, Susan said carefully, but only the ones worth the extra cost. Their aged cheese, for example. It's expensive, but a little goes a long way. Clint nodded approvingly. He had called Greg last night. The conversation had been difficult, but necessary. Greg had eventually understood that the restaurant needed to make changes to survive. By 9 a.m., all 25 staff members had arrived. They gathered in the dining room, sitting at tables, looking nervous. Many were surprised to see Clint there. Some worried this meeting meant they would lose their jobs. Clint stood up and the room went quiet. Despite his age, he still had a powerful presence. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "Some of you know me well. Others have never met me before today. But all of you work for me, and it's time we had an honest conversation." He paused, looking around the room. "The Malpaso Grill is in trouble," he said simply. "We're losing money. If nothing changes, we'll have to close by Christmas." A wave of whispers went through the room. People looked shocked and worried. "But," Clint continued, raising his hand for quiet, "we're not going to let that happen." He explained the situation clearly: the expensive suppliers, the kitchen renovation costs, the wine that wasn't selling, the loss of local customers due to higher prices. "I made mistakes," Clint admitted. "I tried to make this place too fancy, too expensive. I forgot what was important." He walked slowly around the room as he spoke. "When I opened this restaurant, it wasn't to make money. It wasn't to impress my Hollywood friends. It was to create a place where good food brings people together. A place that feels like Carmel, welcoming to everyone, not just the wealthy." Clint stopped near a young dishwasher named Carlos, who had started working at the restaurant only 2 months ago. "I want to hear from all of you," Clint said. "You're on the front lines every day. What do you think we should change?" At first, no one spoke. Then Lily, the server from yesterday, raised her hand. "The locals miss the old prices," she said. "They tell me all the time. They love the food but can't afford to come as often." Bartender named Dan spoke next. "The wine list is too complicated. People want something good but easy to understand. And honestly, Mr. Eastwood, your friend's wine is ... not very popular." Clint nodded, encouraging more people to speak. Carlos, the young dishwasher, raised his hand nervously. "My grandmother says she misses the old fish stew that used to be on the menu. She says it reminded her of home." For the next 30 minutes, Clint listened as staff members shared their thoughts. They talked about menu items customers missed, prices that were too high, and things that were working well. Clint took notes on everything. When everyone had spoken, Clint stood in the center of the room again. "Thank you," he said. "This is exactly what I needed to hear. Now let me tell you the plan." He explained the changes that would start immediately. First, we're creating a new menu. Simpler, more affordable, using local ingredients when possible. Susan has been working on this already. Susan held up her folder, smiling. Second, we're adjusting our prices. The goal is to have locals come back 2 or 3 times a week, not just for special occasions. Third, we're changing our wine list. We'll still carry Greg's wine, but as a special offering, not a main feature. Clint continued through his list of changes. As he spoke, the mood in the room shifted from worry to hope. The staff began to feel like they were part of something important, saving a restaurant they all cared about. "There's one more thing," Clint said when he had finished explaining the changes. "I need every one of you to be honest with me and with each other from now on. No more hiding problems. If something isn't working, I want to know about it immediately." He looked directly at Joe, Susan, and Bill, who were sitting together at a table near the front. "I'm not just some Hollywood guy who owns this place as a hobby," Clint continued. "This restaurant matters to me. You all matter to me. But I can't help fix problems I don't know about." The staff nodded in agreement. Many looked relieved that their jobs were safe and that there was a plan to save the restaurant. "Now," Clint said, checking his watch, "we open in 1 hour. Let's get ready for a new chapter at the Malpaso Grill." As the staff dispersed to prepare for opening, Clint called Joe, Susan, and Bill to join him at his table. "There's one more thing I didn't mention to everyone," Clint said quietly. I've decided to be here every day for the next month. Every day? Joe asked, surprised. Clint nodded. I finished filming last week. The editing will take months. I have time, and this place needs me. What about the press? Susan asked. If word gets out that you're working here every day, we'll be swamped with people just trying to see you. Clint smiled slightly. That might not be a bad thing for business. What will you do here? Bill asked. Whatever needs doing, Clint replied. Greet customers, help in the kitchen. Maybe wash some dishes with Carlos. I want to understand every part of this place. The three managers exchanged looks of surprise. Even after decades in Hollywood, Clint Eastwood was willing to wash dishes to save his restaurant. 1 hour until opening, Clint reminded them. Let's get to work. As they walked toward the kitchen, Susan paused beside Clint. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? Clint asked. For not being angry with us for hiding the problems. For not firing everyone and starting over. Clint looked at her thoughtfully. In all my years making movies, I learned one important thing. When a project is in trouble, you don't blame people. You fix the problems and move forward together. With that, Clint Eastwood rolled up his sleeves and walked into the kitchen of his struggling restaurant, ready to do whatever it took to save it. 2 weeks passed quickly. Every day, Clint arrived at the Malpaso Grill before it opened and stayed until after it closed. True to his word, he worked in every part of the restaurant. He greeted customers at the door. He bussed tables when they were busy. He even washed dishes with Carlos during the dinner rush. The changes were happening fast. Susan had introduced the new menu after just 3 days. It featured simpler dishes made with local ingredients. The fish stew that Carlos's grandmother loved was back, now called Caramel Bay Chopino. It quickly became their most popular item. Bill had adjusted all the prices. Most dishes now cost about 30% less than before. The restaurant was making less money per customer, but many more customers were coming in. Word had spread quickly around Caramel that Clint Eastwood was working at his restaurant every day. Tourists came hoping to see the famous actor. But more importantly, the local customers were returning. On this particular evening, Mrs. Henderson was back for the 3rd time in 2 weeks. Clint spotted her at her regular table and walked over. To say hello. Back again so soon? He asked with a smile. The fish stew, she said simply. It's like it used to be. And the prices too, Clint nodded. We're getting back to our roots. And it doesn't hurt that people can say they had dinner served by Clint Eastwood, Mrs. Henderson added with a wink. Clint laughed. I'm just helping out where needed. As he walked back toward the kitchen, Clint felt good about the progress they had made. But he knew there were still problems to solve. The restaurant was busier, but they were still not making enough profit to be sustainable long-term. In the kitchen, Susan was directing her staff with calm efficiency. The new menu had fewer items, which made everything run more smoothly. She spotted Clint and waved him over. We need to talk, she said, wiping her hands on her apron. It's about the suppliers. They stepped into the walk-in refrigerator where they could speak privately. The cool air was a relief after the heat of the kitchen. I've been working with the local suppliers, Susan explained. They're happy to have our business back, but there's a problem. They can't always provide the quantity we need, especially now that we're busier. Clint frowned. What do we need that they can't provide? Seafood mainly, Susan said. The local fishing boats bring in great stuff, but it varies day to day. Some days they have plenty, other days almost nothing. So, we need a backup plan, Clint said thoughtfully. Exactly. I was thinking we could keep one of Greg's suppliers, the one that provides seafood. They're more expensive, but they're reliable. We would only use them when the local boats don't have enough. Clint considered this. It made sense. They needed reliability. Let's do it, he agreed. Talk to Joe about working it into the budget. As they left the refrigerator, Bill approached them with a tablet in his hand. I have the numbers for the first 2 weeks of changes, he said. He looked nervous. The three of them moved to a quiet corner of the kitchen. Bill showed them the screen with the financial data. The good news is we're bringing in more customers. Bill began. Almost double what we had before. And the bad news? Clint asked. We're still losing money, Bill admitted. Not as much as before, but still about $2,000 a week. Clint studied the numbers. The lower prices had brought in more customers, but not enough to make up for the reduced profit on each meal. What about the wine? Clint asked. That's actually one bright spot, Bill said, brightening a bit. Dan's new wine list is working. Well, people are ordering more wine overall, even though we're selling less of Greg's expensive wine. Dan had created a simple wine list with clear descriptions and affordable options. Customers found it much easier to understand than the previous complicated list. So we need to find a way to make about $2,000 more each week, Clint summarized. Just then, Joe came into the kitchen looking excited. You need to come see this, he said to Clint. There's someone you should meet. Curious, Clint followed Joe into the dining room. At a table near the window sat an older man in a suit, talking with Mrs. Henderson. That's Frank Miller, Joe explained. Quietly, he runs the Carmel Business Association. He wants to talk to you. Clint walked over to the table. Frank stood up to shake his hand. Mr. Eastwood, Frank said with obvious respect. It's good to see you so involved with your restaurant. May I have a moment of your time? Of course, Clint said, sitting down. Mrs. Henderson smiled and excused herself, saying she needed to visit the ladies' room. I'll be direct, Frank said. Once they were alone. The changes you've made here are exactly what Carmel needs. Bringing back affordable dining with local ingredients, it's what this town was built on. Thank you, Clint said. We're working hard to make it right. The other business owners have noticed, Frank continued. We've been talking. Many restaurants in town are having similar problems. High costs, losing local customers. They're wondering if you would share your approach with them. Clint raised an eyebrow. Share our approach? Yes, perhaps a meeting where you and your team could explain the changes you've made. Nothing too detailed. We're not asking for financial information. Just general principles. Clint thought about this. He had always believed in helping the community of Carmel. It was why he had run for mayor all those years ago. I'd be happy to meet with them, Clint agreed. But I have a better idea. He explained his thought to Frank, whose eyes grew wider as Clint talked. That could work, Frank said when Clint finished. It could really work. When Frank left, Clint gathered Joe, Susan, and Bill in the office. I think I've found a solution to our remaining financial problem, he told them. He explained his conversation with Frank and the idea he had proposed. A Carmel Restaurant Week, Joe said, impressed. With all the local restaurants featuring local ingredients. And we would host the kickoff event here, Susan added. That would bring in a lot of business. Frank thinks the Business Association would sponsor it, Clint explained. They would handle advertising across Northern California. We'd get visitors from San Francisco, San Jose, even Sacramento. Bill was already typing on his tablet, calculating potential profits. If we got even 50 extra customers each day during that week, at an average of $40 per person. Bill looked up with a smile. It would more than cover our weekly shortfall. And if it works well, we could do it quarterly, Clint suggested. 4 times a year. The team looked excited. This could be the solution they needed. There's one more thing, Clint said. Frank mentioned that a reporter from the San Francisco Chronicle is in town this week. He's writing a story about changes in the restaurant industry after the pandemic. Frank thinks we should talk to him. Free publicity, Joe said thoughtfully. That could help a lot. But are we ready for that kind of attention? Susan asked. We're still working out the kinks with the new menu and suppliers. Clint understood her concern. We'll be honest with the reporter. We'll tell him about our struggles and the changes we're making. People respect honesty. The team nodded in agreement. Their conversation was interrupted by Carlos, who knocked on the office door. Sorry to interrupt, he said. But Mrs. Henderson is looking for you, Mr. Eastwood. She says she has an idea she wants to share. Clint smiled. Always listen to your customers, he said to his team. Especially the ones who care enough to come 3 times in 2 weeks. As Clint left to talk with Mrs. Henderson, Joe, Susan, and Bill looked at each other with renewed hope. The Malpaso grill wasn't saved yet, but for the first time in months, the future looked bright. Asterisk. 3 months had passed since the day Clint walked into his restaurant and overheard that conversation in the office. It was a warm Friday evening, and the Malpaso grill was completely full. People were even waiting outside for tables to open. Clint stood at the back of the dining room, watching everything with satisfaction. He was no longer working at the restaurant every day, but he still came 3 or 4 times a week. He enjoyed seeing the results of all their hard work. Joe approached him with a smile. The second Caramel Restaurant Week starts on Monday, he said. We're already fully booked for the entire week. Clint nodded. The first restaurant week had been a huge success 2 months ago. 23 restaurants in Caramel had participated, all featuring local ingredients and special menus. The Malpaso Grill had hosted the opening night party, which was attended by food critics from San Francisco and Los Angeles. Did you see this? Joe handed Clint a copy of the San Francisco Chronicle. There was a large article about Caramel becoming a destination for food lovers who wanted fresh, local cuisine at reasonable prices. The article mentioned Clint and the Malpaso Grill as the inspiration for the movement. There was even a photo of Clint in the kitchen with Susan, both of them preparing the famous fish stew. Good picture, Clint said with a small smile. Good publicity, Joe replied. We've had people from all over California coming here because of that article. Bill joined them, carrying his ever-present tablet. I have the latest numbers, he said. You're going to like them. The 3 men moved to a quiet corner table. Bill showed them the screen. We've been profitable for 6 weeks straight, he explained. Not just breaking, even actually making a healthy profit. Clint studied the numbers carefully. The restaurant was now making about $3,000 in profit each week. It wasn't a fortune, but it was sustainable. The local supplier network is working well, Bill continued. Susan's system of using Greg's seafood supplier as a backup has kept our food costs steady. Clint was pleased. Susan had created a simple system. Each morning, she called the local fishermen to see what they had caught. If it wasn't enough for the day's needs, she placed a small order with Greg's supplier to make up the difference. And Greg's wine, Clint asked. Dan has it featured as our special reserve selection, Joe explained. It sells better that way, about 5 bottles a week. Greg seems happy with the arrangement. Clint was relieved about that. His friendship with Greg had been strained for a while, but it was improving. Greg had even admitted that his suppliers were too expensive for a restaurant like the Malpaso Grill. Susan came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. She looked tired but happy. Mrs. Henderson wants to know if you're joining her table tonight, she told Clint. She's here with her entire bridge club. Wouldn't miss it. Clint replied that Mrs. Henderson had become something of a local celebrity. Her idea, the one she had shared with Clint 3 months ago, had been brilliant. She had suggested a locals' night every Tuesday, with special discounts for Caramel residents. It had quickly become their busiest weeknight. As Susan turned to go back to the kitchen, Clint stopped her. How are things back there? He asked. Running smoothly, she said. The new sous chef, Maria, is working out great. And Carlos got promoted to line cook last week. He has a real talent for it. Clint was pleased to hear this. Carlos had shown interest in cooking, so Clint had arranged for Susan to train him during slow periods. The young man had proven to be a quick learner. "I have some news," Clint said to his 3 managers. "I've decided to make some changes to the ownership structure of the Malpaso Grill." They looked at him with surprise and a hint of worry. "Nothing bad," he assured them. "Actually, I think you'll like this." From his pocket, Clint pulled out 3 envelopes and handed one to each of them. "What's this?" Joe asked, looking at his envelope. "Open it," Clint said. They each opened their envelopes and read the papers inside. Their eyes widened in shock. 10% ownership, Bill gasped. "You're giving each of us 10% ownership of the restaurant?" Clint nodded. "That's right. Together, you 3 now own 30% of the Malpaso Grill. I keep 70%. But why?" Susan asked, clearly stunned. "Because you earned it," Clint said simply. "You 3 saved this place. You work day and night to turn it around. You should share in its success." Joe looked emotional. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep running this place the right way," Clint replied. "Keep it a restaurant that serves good food at fair prices. A place where locals feel welcome and tourists get a real taste of Carmel." "We will," Susan promised. "But what about you? Will you still be involved?" "Of course," Clint said. "This place matters to me. But I'm 91 years old. I have a few more movies I want to make while I still can. Knowing you 3 are in charge gives me the freedom to do that." The 3 new part owners looked at each other with pride and determination. This wasn't just a job anymore. They were now partners in something special. "There's one more thing," Clint added. "I've set aside 5% of the profits to create a fund for the staff. Any employee who stays for more than a year can apply for education assistance or help buying a home. I want working here to mean something." Before any of them could respond, there was a commotion at the front door. A group of people with cameras were trying to enter the restaurant. "Looks like the press found out you're here tonight," Joe said to Clint. Clint sighed. "I'll handle it." He walked to the front door where Lily was politely but firmly keeping the photographers outside. "Mr. Eastwood," one of them called. "Is it true you're working as a waiter in your own restaurant?" "No," Clint said calmly. "I'm not a waiter. Sometimes I bus tables. Sometimes I wash dishes. Sometimes I just talk with our customers. This is a restaurant, not a photo opportunity." "But why are you working here at all?" another photographer asked. "You're Clint Eastwood." Clint looked at the man thoughtfully. "Because this place matters to me," he said. "Because sometimes the most important things in life aren't the most glamorous. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have dinner plans with Mrs. Henderson and her bridge club." With that, Clint turned and walked back into his restaurant, leaving the photographers outside. As he made his way to Mrs. Henderson's table, customers smiled and nodded at him. Not because he was a famous actor, but because he was the owner who had saved their favorite local restaurant. Clint Eastwood had made many movies in his long career. He had won Oscars and worldwide fame. But as he sat down with Mrs. Henderson and her friends, he felt a different kind of satisfaction. He had built something real here, something that brought joy to regular people every day. And in the end, that might be his finest achievement of all.